let me also add a small remark. I think more in general, enhanced European economic governance and more unity in internal policy choices within the European Union is also a precondition to be able to project externally your power. It is not all about thinking about the architecture and saying Europe wants a voice. Once that Europe has a voice, people are going to ask, and what does it have to say? And if there the response is mitigated, goes in different senses, then so good for the fact that you have been given the floor. So we absolutely also need to have more internal unity in our policy choices in order to be able afterwards to externalize this necessary influence. Okay, this is the first set of challenges that awaits us. Global governance, role of the European Union. Second challenge I want to mention is about our neighborhood. Stabilizing and developing relations with our neighborhood, both east and south. As the center of gravity of the world is shifting to the east, Europe has to take increased responsibilities in order to accompany the transitions on its southern and eastern flanks and to ensure stability and prosperity around its borders. Let me perhaps mention that it is not only a question of European responsibility, it is also a question that you see in the attitude of the United States, who is not ready to continue to play part of the role that it has always been playing in the last decades, providing for a very comfortable umbrella for European member states, but saying now, for example, in the situation of the Libya crisis, well, that's very near you, go at it, and we will be supportive, but we will not be in the driver's seat. This new attitude of the United States is of course going to push Europe further towards acknowledging that it has a responsibility towards its eastern and southern neighborhood. Going into a little bit more detail, it is clear that in the east, the EU is gradually redefining its relations with nations that up till the end of the Cold War lived under communist rule. 2 weeks ago in Warsaw, the Eastern Partnership Summit took place, one of the most important meetings during the Polish EU presidency. And the preparatory discussions of the conclusions have sharply focused on debates on how the EU wants to define its relation with its neighbors. According to Belgian views, we want to invest heavily in the broad development of relations in all walks of life, because it is a partnership that is very much based on a community of values, of principles of liberty, democracy, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms and the rule of law. At the same time, however, we, Belgians, are convinced that this process of rapprochement, even if it's very natural and when you have a good look at history, unavoidable if anybody would want to avoid it. So it is really in the course of time. But on the other hand, this rapprochement, how inevitable it may be, it does not automatically give an entry pass as a new member of a club that we have called the European Union. We continue to say that one should be able to make the distinction between the two. The rapprochement and becoming a member of the European Union are two different things. And in a meeting with my 26 colleagues, at one point I told the comparison, saying when a boy invites a girl to go to the movies, it is possible that there will be a marriage. That is possible. But it's not the subject matter you start with. You start by explaining what good movie you're going to look, and it has a value in itself, going to the movies. The rapprochement has a value in itself, and it is not only valuable if it leads to EU membership. At our southern borders, we have, of course, witnessed probably the most important event since the fall of the Berlin Wall with the Arab awakening. I continue to use the word Arab awakening rather than Arab Spring, because spring gives me the idea of seasons coming and going, and I think that Arab awakening gives more right to the reality that it is a choice of people, and it is an action of people who are voluntary and choose their destiny. So I speak about the Arab awakening, and it is clear that since the beginning of 2011, for sure a turning point in the recent history of the Arab nations in the Mediterranean area has arrived. And the EU cannot stay aloof to the massive expressions of hope and change at its southern borders. Who could have thought 1 year ago that after decades of stagnation, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity would be created for both sides to begin a new and intense relationship based on shared values of democracy, rule of law, and the adherence to universal human rights. We always said, us Europeans, that human rights are universal. But unfortunately, one might say, did we really believe it ourselves? Because we were surprised when the youngsters in Tripoli, when the people in Cairo, they proved that we were right, that every person shares the same wish to be able to choose the books he reads, to be able to know what she wants to say without fear from police, that everybody wants a democratic choice in the appointment of their leaders, that everybody wants to enjoy free press, that everybody wants freedom and capacity to develop himself. These fundamental universal rights, they are universal, and they are not to be culturally relativized. Now we have to find answers to difficult challenges related to trade, to immigration, to the stabilization of hesitating and fragile democratic processes, without paternalism. I know that taking into account the difficulties that states like, for example, Libya have, when you have to acknowledge that for decades they did not have a democratic infrastructure. When people like myself speak about that, very easily we are pushed into a paternalistic camp as if we want to teach something to the Libyan people. No, the revolution of the Libyan people is their property, it's their history, it's their choice. But on the other hand, one has to recognize that people looking for democracy, they can once in a while be very thankful for a little word of support or a little help from those who have perhaps a little bit more experience in the democratic process. Taking care of our own neighborhood and thereby stabilizing potential areas of unrest or internal stabilization in the EU is of course a daunting task for the EU, but it is urgent and it is desirable. Let me add to this that this task is not only about money, it is as much, if not more, about improving governance and about the respect or acceptance of the rule of law. The big example to be given is, of course, the trade relations with the southern part of the Mediterranean. It is clear that the current already existing trade agreements, they are absolutely not used to the fullest. They're absolutely not used at 100%. So rather than send our diplomats and send our experts to renegotiate new treaties, new agreements, let's work to make the fullest of the existing agreements. Okay, second big challenge, our environment, our neighborhood. Then a third challenge, and that is the circle of our main partners in the world, which we all too easily call our strategic partners. As Herman Van Rompuy said, when we acknowledge that the United States, Russia, India, Brazil, China, Japan, name but a few, that these countries are to be considered as strategic partners, Herman Van Rompuy said, well, now we have strategic partners, next we need a strategy. Having strategic partners is, of course, recognizing that there are countries in the world that have a big influence on the destiny and the happiness of your people. That is being a strategic partner. It's somebody who, through his actions, through his choices, can have a strong impact on how life is in your country. That is a very pragmatical definition of what is a strategic partner. Our relations with these important partners offer certainly tremendous opportunities for increased cooperation in trade, science, climate change, anti-terrorism, diplomatic cooperation, etc. But by the sheer size and clout, these partners can also be considered as challenges to the EU, as their national interests do not always coincide with ours. Therefore, in the past 2 years, the President of the European Council and the High Representative Catherine Ashton undertook special efforts to reflect on how to improve the EU's approach towards these partners. In September of last year, the European Council decided that the EU will act more strategically so as to bring Europe's true weight to bear internationally. This, of course, requires a clear identification of its strategic interests and objectives at a given moment, and a focused reflection on the means to pursue them more assertively. And I come back to the point I made when I discussed the first challenge. If you do not know yourself what your priorities are, very difficult to negotiate them with somebody else who perhaps has his priorities quite straight. Almost every day now, we are confronted with questions related to the choices of our new strategic partners. When the UN Security Council 2 weeks ago could not find an agreement on a new resolution on Syria, we wondered why its temporary members, such as India, South Africa or Brazil, did not support a moderate text that appealed to the Syrian regime to cease brutalities against its own population. How do these BRICS countries deal with important questions of responsibility in and for world affairs? In my speech before the General Assembly of the United Nations, I presented a boutade, a phrase, saying that it is time to replace non-interference as a principle, non-interference, by the principle of non-indifference. We cannot stay indifferent when today in the streets of Syria things are happening that pushed us a few months ago to very urgent action for the streets in Libya. Another example of the kind of matters that we discuss with our strategic partners is on the fate of the Doha development round of the WTO. Shall we work together for a fair and balanced deal to the benefit of all trading nations, rich and poor? That is, at least at the European side, a strong desire. But it must be said that the prospect for a deal is nowhere in sight, despite tremendous efforts of the EU in these negotiations. Later in my lecture you will hear other subjects of global importance that we discuss with particular interest with our strategic partners. And still speaking about strategic partners, I take the occasion to speak about a continent which has a lot of difficulty of being seen as a strategic partner. But as a Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs, I do not hesitate to say Africa, the continent Africa, is for the European Union, as far as I'm concerned, to be considered as a strategic partner. I think when talking about the countries of big power today, it is clear that a lot of people are looking at the tremendous double-digit growth rates in India and China, that we look upon the very long friendship with the United States, and we're not going to go away with that. But when it's about the future of this planet, in my view, having a good look at the strategic interests of Europe and Africa and looking at how they can be joined together is for me a question of a very important belief and conviction.